Hey everybody, today we are going to make, here in the Bourbontucky kitchen, a Kentucky Bourbon Bundt Cake, which is a recipe I found a long time ago, like quite a few years ago on the internet. I do not know who started it. I have seen it posted a bunch of different places, so it's definitely a well-known recipe, but it's one of my favorites to do, and one of the most important steps you have to do is right here at the beginning, and that is you need to set out 2 sticks of butter, 4 eggs, and a cup of buttermilk. Because all these ingredients need to come to room temperature, which takes about an hour. And it's especially important for the butter to get to room temperature because you're going to cream it with some sugar. And it really needs to be at the right consistency in order for butter to do its magic. And I know you're going to ask, what is the temperature it should be at? Well, about 61 degrees. And it'll take about an hour to get there. All right, I'll see you in an hour. So you know about the eggs and the butter and the buttermilk. There's going to be a few more things you're going to need to make this cake. Cake flour, which is different from regular flour, so make sure you get cake flour. This is the secret to it not sticking in the bundt pan. Baker's Joy. I love this stuff. You need a bundt pan. This is a pretty good one. The heavier the better. I like to use a scale because I like to measure out in grams when I'm doing baking, because I feel like the more precise, the more consistent your results are going to be. A small dish to heat up sugar and bourbon for the glaze. A small pan. Going to need some baking powder and some baking soda. Alright, so we're going to get going here. First thing we're going to do is measure out the flour and the baking powder and the baking soda. Alright, so we're going to do 345 grams of cake flour, which is 3 cups, but I like to do it this way. It's been in my experience that the more precise you are when doing baking, the more consistent your results are going to be. So 345 grams. All right, that's 345 grams. 1 teaspoon of baking powder. I'm using a half teaspoon measure, so I put 2 of those in there. Then a half teaspoon of baking soda. And 1 teaspoon of fine sea salt. All right, a teaspoon of fine sea salt. That's a half. That's a whole. All right, there we go. We're going to whisk that together and set it aside. All right, let's set that right there. Okay, Now we are going to do the butter and the sugar. So this is another thing you're going to need is a KitchenAid mixer, unless you've got something else that'll do the same thing. KitchenAid is a workhorse that an awful lot of kitchens in America have. Look at that one, it's on already. Alright, so we are going to measure the sugar into the bowl of the KitchenAid mixer. Now, we're going to put in 300 grams of sugar. All right, that's 300 grams. 100 grams of brown sugar. And 100. There we Then we are going to put it on the mixer, put the paddle attachment, there we go. Then we're going to take the 2 sticks of butter, put them in there, and then start creaming them. This is very important for the texture of the cake. When you have a butter and sugar cake like this, you really want to make sure you cream the butter enough. And a lot of that is having the butter at the right temperature. And then going until it's light and fluffy, which was something that I didn't really understand what it was until I saw it. And I'm like, oh, it does look light and fluffy. That makes all the difference in the world. Alright, so we're going to put this in there. Lock it. Medium-high speed. So we're going to start slow to get that butter kind of capable of mixing with the sugar. Slowly increase the speed. I don't know about you, but I can't imagine doing this by hand. Which I know my grandmother used to do. Until she got one of these things. Alright, so that is medium-high right there. And we're going to let that go for at least 5 minutes. And we'll see what it looks like. Now, in the meantime, we're going to measure 150 grams of sugar into this pot. I'm going to use that sugar later to make the glaze. I just like to measure it out while I got the sugar out. Yeah, you can tell the butter's at a good temperature because of the way it's just it's fluffing up pretty quickly. That's very good. That's pretty good. Alright, that's good. I'm happy with that. That is light and fluffy. Now, okay, so we're going to add the eggs one at a time. These are the room temperature eggs. Alright, so we're locked again. We're going to mix it slow. We'll push all this down. We're going to put an egg in. Alright, that's second egg. There's the third egg. And this is egg number 4. Alright, that's good and combined. Okay, now we're going to put a 1/4 cup of the bourbon into the buttermilk. And you're going to say, well, what kind of bourbon are you going to use? Well, I'm going to use some Elijah Craig bourbon for this, and then I'm going to use Wild Turkey for the glaze. Because those are the two that I think have the flavors that most enhance this particular cake. Pretty much exactly a 1/4 cup. Put in there. And we're going to whisk that together. Alright, now at this point we're going to spray this pan because we're going to have some batter that's going to go into this pan shortly. And I want to have the pan good and prepared. You want to do it, actually I'm going to wait until we have the batter. You want to do it as close to when you're going to put it in the oven as possible. With the mixer on low speed, we're going to add the flour mixture in 3 additions, alternating with the buttermilk bourbon mixture, starting and ending with the flour. Alright, so slow speed. Here's our flour. Roughly a third, and let that mix in. And we're going to put about half of the buttermilk bourbon combination in there. Another third of that. And put in the second half of the buttermilk bourbon. Now you're using buttermilk because it's activating the baking powder. You need a little acid to get that baking powder to do its thing. Now we're going to put the last bit of the dry flour into this. And we're going to stop it just before it gets totally mixed, and we're going to do the rest of it by hand. Okay, and at this point, I am going to put the Baker's Joy into the bundt pan. Make sure it's all lined up the proper way. Yep. And I'm just going to put a lot in there. I'm just telling you. In my experience, you do not want these things to stick. And so you just make sure you give it a real good coating into all the little crevices on the bundt pan. Bundt pans are all about. You know, the bundt pan is great because you're cooking the outside and the inside of the cake at the same time. Which might sound daunting, but actually it's a great advantage. And is a much more forgiving technique than other forms of cake baking. All right, we're going to unlock this. Didn't see that coming. Go like this. It's quite a mess. And we're going to use this to mix the last part of it. You know what they say, make mistakes, you just gotta keep going. Even if I got stuff all over me now. Hilarious. Alright, mix in this last part of the dry flour. And that's it. You don't want to mess with this too much. So that's all mixed. Now we're going to put it into the bundt pan. Way around. We're just going to kind of smooth this out a little bit on the top here. So it's pretty even. That looks pretty good. Now we're going to put this into the oven at 350 we're going to check it at 40 minutes and then check it again at 45 minutes. Alright. It is in the oven, setting the timer for 40 minutes. And now I'm going to try and get all this glop off of me. All right, we'll see you in a bit. All right, so while that cake is baking, I thought I'd pour myself a little bourbon, and I thought you might want to do the same thing. This is a little JTS Brown here from my bourbon decanter. That's a very nice gift if you want to get one for somebody. It says bourbon's engraved on the bottle. Pretty cool. From a friend of mine back in California. All right, so let's have a little cheers. JTS Brown Bottled in Bond. If you can't get it, you should. It's really, really delicious, and it's only like $12 a bottle, and it's 100 proof, so you can't go wrong. But back to the history of this recipe, because I think it's a really interesting and somewhat hilarious story. So when I first found this, it was on a blog called Eats Well with Others by a woman named Joanne. And I made the recipe, thought it was really good, and then I made it a whole bunch more times and thought it was really good, but I was really curious as to where did this thing come from. So I noticed at the bottom of her recipe, she says, this was adapted from a recipe in a book called Vintage Cakes. Well, I couldn't help myself, so I looked up Vintage Cakes and got the book. It was out of print, and I think it was like $12 or something from Amazon. So inside of the book, it says, oh, and it's a signed copy, by the way, no big deal. It says, move over shortcake. This buttermilk bundt cake drenched in a boozy bourbon glaze is a great vehicle for whipped cream and strawberries. Kentucky Bourbon Cake was the prize-winning entry by Nell Lewis at the 1963 Pillsbury Bake-Off contest in Platte City, Missouri. All right. Well, let's look into that a little bit. I was pretty curious about why a woman from Missouri would make a cake called Kentucky, and as it turns out, I'm not the only one. So, from a blog called Hummingbird High, done by Michelle Lopez, she says, I first found this recipe in a cookbook by Julie Richardson, a local Portland baker and owner of the very delicious bakery Baker and Spice. Back in 2012, Julie wrote Vintage Cakes, a cookbook dedicated to updating old-fashioned recipes for modern tastes. And one of the recipes was for this Kentucky Bourbon Butter Cake. Julie writes that this recipe dates back to the 1960s, and it was recorded as the prize-winning entry in the 1963 Pillsbury Bake-Off. Now, she says that it was in Platte City, Missouri, but the bake-off was actually in Los Angeles, but Nell Lewis, the woman that wrote the recipe, was from Platte City, Missouri. So, none other than the New York Times published this recipe. And in the comments under the recipe, we hear from a woman named Francie, who says, Mrs. Lewis's husband, Dr. Albert G. Lewis, practiced medicine with my father, Dr. H. Graham Parker, in Platte City, Missouri in the 1960s. Our mother was thrilled when Nell Lewis took her cake to the bake-off. Sadly, the Pillsbury rules precluded the use of alcohol, so Nell had to use rum flavoring for rum at the bake-off. Rum? Well, that's curious because it's supposed to be a bourbon cake. So it was originally a rum cake? See how weird this story is? So she had to substitute rum flavoring because they wouldn't allow her to use alcohol. She couldn't use rum. And according to Francie, it didn't taste very good because rum flavoring doesn't taste very much like rum at all. So the original recipe called for adding a half cup of light rum after taking the sauce off the heat. Well, all right. So it was a rum cake, and it won the Pillsbury Bake-Off in 1963 by a woman from Missouri. So I, of course, went to the Pillsbury Bake-Off archive to see what I could find out about Nell Lewis. Well, in 1963, the winner of the contest was not Nell Lewis. So isn't that curious? So another blogger who writes a blog called Chewing the Fat, and his name is Monty Matthews. Well, he was curious about this too, and just like me, started digging in. He says, I searched in vain for some trace of Ms. Lewis in her hometown newspaper, the Platte County Citizen, but to no avail. I admit, I even checked the obituaries. She had disappeared without a trace, and I think I know why. Ms. Lewis didn't actually win the grand prize. That honor belonged to Mira Waliko of Detroit, Michigan for her Hungry Boys casserole. Ms. Lewis' Kentucky Butter Cake did appear in several volumes of Pillsbury's Best of the Bake-Off recipes. with a key difference and the secret as to why a cake from Missouri was named after Kentucky. You guessed it. She replaced the rum with bourbon. And I think we're all better off as a result of that strange thing happening. But it's funny, every time this recipe gets mentioned, her name is mentioned along with it and the 1963 Pillsbury. But there's no truth to that, and it wasn't even a bourbon cake, it was a rum cake. I know one thing, it's delicious, and soon you're gonna be eating it. So if you can, press the subscribe button to be a part of the Bourbontucky happening. We're gonna have another recipe here soon for Henry Baines sauce. If you've ever been to bourbon country, you've heard of Henry Baines. So I'm gonna teach you how to make that. And there's gonna be other things coming up. We have some cocktails we're gonna make and some other investigation into life in Kentucky. So thanks y'all for watching, and let's get back to finish that cake. Peace and bourbon, y'all. Good stuff. All right, we're getting ready to take the cake out. Got my head cam on. So see what it looks like. All right, here we go. So it's been 40 minutes. Now I like to see with a little skewer here, make sure that it is done in this part. And it is. So that's cool. The stick came out clean, that's good. So we're going to turn off the oven. Going to bring this over here. Now, while that's going on, you're going to mix up this, which is the butter and the sugar and the bourbon. So we're going to put that over a low flame here. Not that one. This one. And we're just going to let those mix together. In the meantime, we're going to take the wooden skewer and we're going to poke holes all over the place in the top of this cake. I'm going around the outside first. I'm going to go to the middle territory. And you're poking these holes because you're going to pour this bourbon, sugar, and butter into the cake, which is going to make it even more moist and more bourbony. Who doesn't like a bourbony bundt cake? I think that's the best kind of bourbon bundt cake, is a bourbony. Alright, so that's good. Now we're going to I'm just going to let that go for a minute. Maybe have a little sip of bourbon. Not the worst idea while you're making a bourbon and bundt cake. Am I right? The butter's just about melted. And the sugar does not feel gritty anymore. Alright, that's good. So we are going to now pour this slowly over the bottom of the cake. And you want to leave about a third to a quarter of it. But we're going to glaze the cake after this all soaks in. So you can set this back on the oven because you're going to have to reheat it to get it to be like it is right now, because it will get a little glossed over. All right, that's good. So now we're going to let this sit for 30 minutes. Set timer. And we are good to go. All right, be back. Alright, well, it's been 30 minutes. There's the timer. Then you have to heat the sugar mixture up a little bit more so we can pour it on top of the cake. And we're going to put it in this cake box. Of course, the moment of truth is when we get the cake out of the pan, just like it always is. So, let's take this cake and put it on this. And there's the cake. Not too bad. That's the thing I like about this recipe is I've done it a lot of times now, and it's consistently good. People always like it. My friends and family really like this cake a lot. So do I. But you always have to give some away because it's a big cake. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set this in this box, which is just a nifty box. Then I'm going to take the rest of the glaze and just slowly pour it on the top of the cake. And try and get it drizzled on the inside and on the outside. All right, so that is the Kentucky Bourbon Bundt Cake, because it's just really good. It's solid. It delivers every time. And I'm glad I got to share it with y'all. This is another, a sweet edition of the Bourbontucky kitchen. So we'll talk with you again soon. And thanks for watching. Later. Got this cake, we put it on the platter, and yeah, I cooked the cake in May and now it's December, so my beer's a little bigger. But let's see how it tastes. Let's see how this goes. Looks pretty good. Alright, it's good with ice cream or anything else you like with it too. But I hope you enjoy it. It's the Kentucky Bourbon Bundt Cake. And if you can, press the subscribe button. Keep coming back to Bourbontucky. And peace and bourbon, y'all. Happy holidays.
That looks delicious.
Thanks, honey. Let's see how it is. Oh. What? Oh, ting ting. sometimes I like to drizzle a little bit of bourbon on this too. It's just a delicious cake. Oh man.
Very delicious.
It's so bourbony.
Mhm.